No mai, how mai everybody. Welcome to another In Conversation here at the OT board. We're joined today with Ellen Nicholson from AUT and Penelope Kinney from Otago in Dunedin. Both heads of school, heads of departments for occupational therapy. And they're the training schools, educational institutions that provide education for graduates of occupational therapy. So we've got one based in AUT on the North Shore and one in Dunedin in Otago Poly and another in Hamilton, which is a satellite, if that's the right phrase, of the Otago program, which happens in Hamilton. So we're going to have a conversation with the two heads of school who are leading the charge on occupational therapy education in New Zealand. So if I can start with Ellen, when you look back over the years that you've been involved in education, what changes have you noticed, if any, with the sort of people who put their hands up and say, I want to be an occupational therapist, I want to go and do that degree. So any changes you've observed in the people that come forward?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having us, Andrew. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk through with you some of the things that are happening in the schools at the moment. When I think about who comes into occupational therapy, I think possibly we're starting to see a little bit more, we're starting to gather some more information about that. So we do see a lot that the #1 recruitment strategy for occupational therapy is knowing an occupational therapist. So a family member or someone they've come across in practice. So we do hear more of people saying, well, actually the reason I want to be an OT is because I've met an OT or I know an OT or there's an OT in my family, which is awesome. In terms of our cohort of students, most people will be aware that we have a lot of school leavers, but we also have a lot of people that come back to university to do a new profession. So leave accounting or leave psychology or leave something else or have a family and come back and study with us at AUT.
Right. And the sort of the number of cohorts, how many do you take in students a year?
It depends. So we can offer up to about 125 and we usually get about 103.
Right. And then attrition through the years, which will normally happen in any educational program, I guess. How many come out at the end with a degree, would you say?
Again, it depends.
Okay.
So, but the sort of standard number is we'll start with about 100, between 103 and 110. And this, for example, we've got 97 third years. So okay. It sits at about 100.
Great. Thanks, Helen. What about Penelope? Changes of the people you see putting their hand up to be an occupational therapist.
Well, Morena, and again, like Ellen, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to have a chat with you and tell you a bit about what's happening at our schools. So probably very similar to what Ellen has said in terms of looking back over the changing landscape, if you like, of those coming into the profession. Probably a couple of things I've noticed. Again, very similar to what Ellen has said, we still certainly get a good number of school leavers, so those who are coming in straight from year 13. However, we probably, and I'm sure Ellen is finding this, increasingly we're getting what we would class as our mature students. So people who have completed a degree in not necessarily health related, but completed a degree and perhaps they're looking for a qualification that will enable them to have a job. Certainly getting a number of people who are looking at career changes. So they have probably spent a good number of years completing something else and they're looking for a redirection in their lives. And as Ellen has said, people who have had contact with an occupational therapist, be it their own clinical experience, so that they've had input from an occupational therapist, or they've got family members, or one of their family members has had contact with an occupational therapist. It generally kind of helps them make that decision about what they might want to do. We're increasingly getting international students as well. So people wanting to come in to have some sort of career that they could potentially stay in New Zealand for. So we certainly, in my time at the school, we've seen an increase in international students. We, like AUT, market the program, and we're really keen to make sure our program is representative of the communities that we live in. So we're keen to ensure that we have a good number of the range of diversity, including, you know, Māori, males, different groupings of people coming in through the program.
Yeah, and I could see Ellen's nodding around that, so it's probably the same for you. Ellen, the demographic that you look
for. I was just going to add to that too. Yes, our Māori and Pacific numbers have remained fairly static over the years at about sort of 14 or 15%. But our numbers of men, young men coming through is really, quite amazing and exciting to see. So it is, it's nice to see that, as Penelope says, that representation of New Zealand.
So just looking at, you know, the sort of demographic, the age group that tends to come into OT, when you see them in the classroom or the lecture room, or they go out in clinical placements, how do you find that they sort of meld together, you know, the young and the old, putting those sort of two sort of points on the scale? What does that look like in the classroom? Is there sort of a supportive framework? You know, are the youngsters shy and retiring while the older ones are saying, you know, in my experience, it's like this?
I don't find that, Penelope. I'm not sure how you find it, but I find that because they're all new to occupational therapy, it's a level playing field. So even if you've got some life experience and some ideas and things that you've seen in the world that you can share in the classroom, and we really love it when students do that, they're all new to occupational therapy, and that kind of means that they are all finding out about this new subject together. And so even, like I said, even if you've got some experience, you don't often have a particular experience of that concept or these things. I don't see them disappearing off into little groups. They tend to work really well together.
And I think, following on from what Ellen was saying, I think that having the combination in the classrooms is really useful and helpful, because the different groups can help and support in different ways. So, for example, and this is probably a really generalistic example, but probably one we see fairly often, is those with life experience. Even though everybody is new to occupational therapists, they may have some foundation skills that they can draw on that our school leavers might not be so confident with, like communication with people you don't know, you know, and those basic everyday communication skills. Whereas we use technology within our teaching, and some of our older students are not necessarily confident and familiar with the range of technology that can actually be utilised, and so our school leavers are really confident and quite familiar with that technology, so they do the supporting. So it kind of swings and roundabouts.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, and if we look at when they go out on fieldwork placements, clinical placements, what feedback do you get from supervisors about the type of people that are, if you do at all, I'm sure you do, about the type of students that are now coming into occupational therapy? It's quite a broad question, but I'll put it out there to Ellen first.
Very much feedback about the type of students. We get a lot of feedback about the skills and competencies and the sort of disposition of the student, and that isn't reflective of the age or the gender or the ethnicity of the student at all. I think what practitioners are talking about is about when they give us feedback about our students, is about those students who are keen to learn, or who demonstrate professional skills, or have a really good or excellent excellent knowledge of something in particular, or are great with people. So I think across the board, it's once upon a time, Andrew, I think there was a time when people said, well, I'd rather have a mature student, and those sorts of things. They seem to have gone, which we're quite happy with. We, because often you'll find a young student who is really outgoing and knowledgeable and brings that sort of innovation and freshness to a practitioner or to a placement that might have been lost if someone else had gone. And so we're not seeing that same, I'm just trying to think, I don't think I've heard that for a long time about the person, but more about the qualities of the person and their skills and knowledge.
And I would agree with Ellen. We don't get a lot of comments about the particular type of person that goes out to placement. It's very similar. It's around their skills. It's around especially their professional skills, their occupational therapy skills. We're going out. I suppose one of the things I've noticed, and maybe this is a generational influence to the type of students coming through, we're really mindful now that students want to know the why. As opposed to this is how you do something, this is what you need to do. It's about, well, why are we doing this? So there is more focus now for us on the bigger picture and putting everything in place so that people can see a whole. So it isn't unusual for students to question about why are we doing this? Why is this important?
That's good to hear. Let's move on a little bit now and look at COVID-19. Presumably you've heard about that. It's presented a huge problem, isn't it, for you guys? A challenge, yeah, about getting the fieldwork hours that students need in order to register at the end of the program. I'll start with Penelope this time and just tell us your story of how you've had to sort of cope with the COVID-19 and still deliver the curriculum and the hours needed for placements.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, I suppose this particular topic could literally take us hours if we wanted to get down to the nitty gritty, because you're not wrong. COVID has posed a number of challenges, really significant, not just for the school, but of course clinicians in practice. And of course it kicked off at the beginning of the year with us looking at the whole year for our students and the different years. So, from the very first students coming in who had quite literally only started their program within weeks before we went into lockdown, and as in the country went into lockdown, so they were all required to work from home, through to our final year students who were really anxious about whether they were going to be able to complete their study and become registered occupational therapists. So the school spent a lot of time focusing on what are we going to do, how are we going to support our clinicians in practice, because of course we didn't want to put people under a whole lot of pressure when they're themselves being redeployed into different work areas. One of the things I think we were really grateful for, I was really grateful for, was the establishment of our weekly catch-ups with yourself, Alan and I, about talking about some of these challenges, being able to brainstorm and get ideas off each other. I think it's been one of the biggest successes, if you like, from this particular situation. But in terms of our program, in terms of what the changes we made, we had to make decisions about March, April, around what we were going to do for the whole year. And so we made some really significant changes to our curriculum. Our year ones, of course, didn't go out into fieldwork, into practice. We created a simulated 4-week placement because we were unsure if our students were even going to be allowed back on campus, let alone travelling around the country. So we created that to be able to be done in place, so they all were able to stay wherever they were. We postponed our year 2 placement, which would normally happen in September to November, because we were really mindful that through some of the guidelines coming out through the DHBs and the Ministry of Health, was that focus needed to be on final year students, health students. So we made the decision to postpone that to 2021. which is happening in February next year. And we delayed our fieldwork for our final year placement from July to September through to September, November. And we're incredibly grateful for the response we got from our clinicians in practice. We got our placements for our final years really quickly. And so our students, of course, have, for us, are finishing as of tomorrow. So our students, our final year students have been able to successfully complete those 1,000 hours, which is fantastic. A real relief for everybody because, you know, being unsure, especially with, you know, parts of the country going into lockdown and what that might mean at different times. We're incredibly grateful that our therapists in practice have come and offered us enough placements for our first year fieldwork in February next year. We're already got enough and already allocated. And of course, the rest of the year for next year will hopefully roll out as we anticipate.
Thank you, Penelope. How about Ellen and the AUT experience?
The bags under their eyes should give away how this year has been. I just wanted to sort of echo Penelope's words and thank everybody who was involved in getting us through this year. So my incredible team of passionate, amazing, hardworking, resilient occupational therapy educators and lecturers who put together this amazing package. So we had exactly the same challenge that Penelope had mentioned at the beginning of the year. The only difference between the two schools, of course, is that we have 640 fieldwork hours in our final year. And what a time to be confronted with exactly how many hours that is. I think the other, I mean, I'm also incredibly grateful to our weekly catch-ups and the opportunity to sort of talk through and share some of the challenges with people that would understand what I was going through in my role. And I think also to the profession, I want to just say thank you, a huge thank you to those therapists and leaders and managers who rallied behind us and offered us placements and supervisors and all sorts of supports. And I also think it's important to thank the students as well. They put a huge amount of trust in us to, and sometimes I wasn't sure I was deserving of that trust because I was literally 30 seconds ahead of them in terms of my planning. But as Penelope said, we've also, our students finished a week and a half ago, our final year students, and they don't know yet, but things look really good in terms of getting everybody through. For us, the challenge was, of course, the day that we went to lockdown, we lost all our P2 placements. So they were due to start in June, but people had sort of no idea about what that would look like from April. And we had to be really creative. I think the World Federation put out a statement which talked about flexibility around practice education and what that could look like in a COVID-19 environment. And I think the profession should be really reassured that the decisions that we made around that placement, which doesn't look the same as every other year we run this degree, were meaningful, well-supported, well-designed experiences for students. We didn't just make up the hours. And I think that's some of the disappointment that I've experienced in my role, is that there's been plenty of people who've felt it was just fine to let me know that they weren't happy with the decisions that I made. And I really encourage those people to think a little bit about some of the challenges that we were facing and the opportunities that came to us, particularly around the Healthline placement and around working with simulation, as Penelope mentioned, but also with students being engaged in essential services, that we put a huge amount of design and thought into those opportunities to make sure that they were meaningful for students and that they would prepare them for their P3, for the papers that came after the placement. We had to rearrange our final year curriculum so that the papers that they would ordinarily do before they go to placement had to be done after placement, and then we needed to make sure that those P2 experiences were well designed, well prepared in terms of the papers, but then prepared them well for heading to P3 as well. And so it wasn't a matter for us of filling in the hours. We were never okay with that as an idea. We had to design these on the fly, these amazing experiences for students that I think they will maybe not today, but they will eventually really appreciate the opportunities that they had in terms of the diversity of experiences that they had. For example, talking to students who did the Healthline placement in a pandemic where they were offering people advice over the phone, talking to people from a huge range of diverse backgrounds, dealing with a huge amount of distress and uncertainty, but also offering occupational therapy advice around what people could do to support their health and well-being in a pandemic. And getting those messages in front of the ministry was really exciting for us. And those students, they did a phenomenal job of representing both AUT and the profession at that level. There's not a huge amount of change for our second and first year students, other than the fact that we've hardly seen them. So everybody is obviously, you know, sort of, we're using a blended learning model. So we have some on, and Penelope is the same, some on campus and some online opportunities. But now that we're kind of towards the end of the year, we get some opportunity, as soon as I finish my marking, to reflect on what we're going to keep. There were some really great things that came out of this year. I think the relationship between the schools is phenomenal, and people have been asking about that for a long time, and that's happened, and it's work. We'll definitely keep that up. I think also that things like the simulation placement, which were a really amazing, well-supported, well-designed opportunity for students to practice applying knowledge in real context. We're hoping to keep some of these things. Blended learning means that students don't need to be in Auckland 24/7. I mean, that's fantastic in terms of opening up the possibilities of you know, who might join the program in the future. So some really exciting things to come from this, I think, that I look forward to having some time to reflect on and put into practice.
Yeah, I guess that's important now to look back. Sorry, Penelope.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I would completely echo that. I mean, I talked a lot about our fieldwork, but because our fieldwork changed, we had to do a lot of redeveloping of our academic courses, also to be able to ensure that fieldwork could go where it needed to be to enable students to do their clinical hours. And similar to Alan, the team here has been phenomenal in the amount of work and input they've put in to ensuring our learners have the best possible outcome. That has always been their priority. And that's the stuff that often happens behind the scenes that isn't really front facing, that clinicians in practice, you know, even our learners don't actually recognise, see the phenomenal amount of work that the lecturers have done to ensure that the students have been able to complete the program as they need to.
Yeah.
I think the profession can be incredibly proud of the work that's been done this year in the schools.
Yeah. Thank you both. I just want to change tack a little bit now about occupational therapy itself as a profession. I took a ride in a taxi the other day, and I always, you get talking to the taxi driver and they say, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I regulate occupational therapists." And then there's a silence because they usually don't understand occupational therapy. You know, what it means, who does it, where it's done, etc. And I'm just turning that in relation to the standing within the educational institutions. So both AUT and Otago are in an institution which has other health professions and other professions and other trades in some cases. What's the standing of occupational therapy in each of your institutions? So, you know, what's the mana? What's the standing of it? Do people know that you exist? And are you brought into, you know, greater conversations around how the institution works and what facilities are available to OT students? Perhaps I'll start with Ellen.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Andrew. I guess, and it gave me an opportunity to kind of have a think about that in terms of the place that we sit. So obviously I sit in where our program sits in a university, and I love the fact that there is diversity in terms of where people can access occupational therapy education. Like a university, a Polytech and a Wānanga would be a wonderful combination if we could have those at some point. But the university environment is obviously a unique environment. We are part of a clinical school, so there are 9 or 10 disciplines within our clinical school. And I think we have a significant amount of mana for a number of reasons. So one is that the school is the largest healthcare provider or healthcare education provider in Australasia. So we have a huge number of disciplines and a huge number of students that sit within the school, and with that comes some research, you know, all those sorts of things that are happening in the school that are aligned with undergraduate and postgraduate education as well. We're also a middle-sized program, so I'm not the smallest, and I'm certainly not the biggest, with nursing being the biggest program here at AT, but that gives us an opportunity to also sort of sit at the table and be part of those conversations that are about that broader school focus. And I really appreciate, particularly being a head of department, that opportunity to contribute to those conversations, to have direct links with the Dean and about what's happening in terms of our school. And yeah, so it's nice it's that sense of belonging, I think. It's nice to sit within a bigger, wider focus within the university. I think the other thing that I'm incredibly proud of is that we have an exemplary program. So we offer students we have our annual program surveys and our opportunities to get feedback from a sort of wider audience. And our program is always very well regarded and receives a lot of really good feedback in terms of what's being offered. And particularly over COVID-19, I particularly loved getting I got called to the school manager's office to have a conversation about the OT students and their behaviour on Facebook, which of course you ordinarily would assume was not going to be positive. But our students were leaping in and talking about how the lecturers, how the staff, how the team, how they felt incredibly supported by this team and this program when other students were not necessarily feeling like that from their programs. So I think even with a small number of staff, I've got 14 staff and about 300 students, it's a good place to be in terms of being able to offer a really great program to also to be part of those bigger conversations.
Thank you, Penelope.
Probably similar to Ellen, we are fortunate as being one of 4 health schools within the College of Health within Otago Polytechnic, and within that college we would probably be the second largest program, of course the largest being nursing, but actually by not a lot. So we're probably in regards to this program sizes, we are probably on the bigger end, which does mean we have a lot more clout, if you like, in terms of being at the table and having discussions around what we need. The great thing about the Polytech is that me being at the head level means I am involved in a range of decision making that affects the school that might not normally be actually available to others. So for example, I can be involved in the budget setting for our school moving forward into future years. I have a very close working relationship with our head of college and with the executive leadership team within Otago Polytechnic. So I'm involved in a monthly meeting in which the executive leadership team attends. So as you could say, that occupational therapy then has a voice at that level within the institution. Probably one of the complicating factors for us at this point, which I can't give you a lot more detail around, is of course the review of vocational education that has happened within New Zealand. So of course all of the 16 polytechnics are now subsidiaries of the larger institution called Te Pukenga, which of course the name was released at the end of September. We are now Otago Polytech Limited and we are a subsidiary. So that means moving forward in another couple of years, when more clarity will be known around how that institution will look, will then determine around where we as a program sit within it. One of our features that I keep talking about when we are in these different meetings is that we are the only occupational therapy program within the Polytechnic sector. So we have to have standing from that. And I'm quite vocal around that in terms of making sure as a program, as a profession, we have a voice.
Okay, thank you. Just one question, one answer for one question. Looking to the future, what one challenge do you think, as educational leaders, you'll be facing, Ellen?
What's one challenge we'll be facing? I think, you've asked me just to say one thing. I think the big thing for us in the short term is obviously the education sector has taken a hit with COVID-19. And I think that's going to create some challenges in terms of designing and delivery of programs. So that's going to be one short-term thing that I think is definitely something that we need to think about. The loss of international students has had a huge impact on the education sector.
Penelope, one challenge for the future?
I think exactly what Ellen said. One of the immediate challenge is around the current borders being closed, the loss of significant income for all tertiary institutions, and the flow-on effect that has to what we can do. I think one of the biggest challenges, if you look much broader than that, is where education should actually happen. And we have a very traditional, people come to a campus, you are educated in that campus. The biggest challenge is we are very aware across this country, we have pockets of areas where there are a lot of people who would be really useful to have in our programs. However, they have challenges themselves around being able to access the campuses. And so we need to start looking at how we can ensure education for all.
I think that's a really good point, Penelope, around that. Access of the workforce and where education takes place is very dynamic, and it's obviously going to change. And COVID, I think, has forced that to some extent.
I was just going to add also what practice education looks like, and that's the conversation we've been also talking about, is that if we're future-proofing or future-facing the profession, then we need to also be thinking about this diversification in the range of placements, what practice education looks like, where it happens, and I think that's something we also need to sort of, in the immediate future, start having these broader conversations with the profession about what that looks like.
So thank you. That's really exciting to be sort of looking over the mountain on the other side to where occupational therapy is going to be in the future, so that graduates coming out of both your programs are prepared for that. Because there is a lead-in time, isn't there, into getting practitioners of the future prepared for that future.
But also ensuring that the profession is in that same waka. I think that it's all very well to move ahead to a sort of future-facing graduate, but we need to bring the profession along with us as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you both for sparing the time and talking with us. That's been really good, and I feel that education and occupational therapy is in good heart, having had the challenges of COVID, but it's come through that very positively. So thank you very much, Mate wa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you.